Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm going to do my best today to try and stay on topic, but if I kind of head into fanboy aviation world, you'll understand. Many of you know I am a pilot, but I'm not like our guest, Mike Manazir, retired Admiral, F-14 pilot, Top Gun graduate, and he and I could probably talk for hours just about aviation and flight and Navy, but there's some other things I really want to get into. Really talking about the concept of leadership, talking about the concept of aspiration, and really not setting any goals whatsoever. And to reach the levels, Mike, you have reached both in your professional career in the U.S. Navy and also now as a public speaker, clearly you are purpose-driven, and it's an honor to have you as a guest. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Gary. And my teeth are all dried out from grinning so much. So telling aviation stories before we got on, show if I'm kind of, licking my lips, it's because I'm all dried from grinning. It's great to be here.
No, it's really a pleasure. Mike and I were sharing some stories where we didn't cross paths directly, but I think we know some of the same people. Mike, I'm really, really interested in your story. You started as a midshipman out of Annapolis, and I became aware. I knew I wanted to be a pilot, I think when I was 3 years old. So I was looking at the Air Force Academy, but it never came to be. At what point did Annapolis become realistic for you? At what point did you know that you wanted to go to the Navy? Was it Navy period or was it aviation? Walk me through that, through your high school years and how you ended up in Annapolis.
Yeah, you know what, Gary, that question is so central to the start of my life, my adult life. You may as well have been sitting with me for years understanding how I started. And when you hear what I'm going to talk about here, you'll understand why. And so I always talk about it's good to have a North Star, and you want to go to that North Star. And in fact, I talk about failure. There's a bunch of failure in this book, and you can list out the accomplishments. You said a couple of them and stuff, but the failures to get there, are really what makes people resilient and their ability to keep going. So I'll go back to the question. So my dad was a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1958, United States Marine. Tough guy. Tough to get, I'm proud of you out of him. Tough to get, I love you out of him. My mom, on the other hand, was like, you are God's gift. So my emotional drivers are actually like two jet engines that power me, trying to meet dad's expectation, and then mom just pushing me up like crazy. And it's given me this very interesting combination of ego and humility, because mom's voice, my head would be this big as a fighter pilot, and you don't even have to ask me what I do for a living. I'll tell you within 5 seconds, I'm a fighter pilot, of course. And then my dad, you're not meeting it. You're not good enough. You need to try harder kind of thing. Both propelled me. That's how I'm made up emotionally. But I listened to dad's stories about the Naval Academy and stuff when I was young. And it was like, okay, it went right over my head. In 1974, when I was in the 8th grade, we went to a Georgia Tech Navy away football game, away for Navy. And we drove from Beaufort, South Carolina over to wherever Georgia Tech is. And we sat in cement bleachers for this football game. And the Navy midshipmen marched on, just like they do in Army Navy, and your listeners and viewers would see them in the Army Navy game, and you see all that pageantry when the mids march on. And I went, bang, that right there, that. I want to be that. Long black coat, white hat, boom, huge flash. I want to be that midshipman. Nothing else mattered right then. And I turned around and told my parents, I'm going to the Naval Academy. And dad says, you got to go to the guidance counselor and talk to him. And so on Monday morning, I went to Robert Smalls Junior High School guidance counselor in Beaufort, South Carolina, and sat down with this nice lady. And I said, I'm going to the Naval Academy. Tell me what I have to do. She takes an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, turns it on its side, draws 4 columns, and writes all of the big courses in high school I had to take for 4 years, all the academics. I went to 4 different high schools because Dad was a Marine. We moved around a lot. I ended up in Mission Viejo, California, did my last 2 years in Mission Viejo, California. It's where I met my wife, Kelly. She'd never moved from Mission Viejo. I'd been running around like crazy with my dad, you know, and moving and stuff, kind of coast to coast as, you know, naval officers, Marines and Navy do. And so we ended up on the West Coast for my last 2 years in high school. And the sweet spot for getting into one of the service academies is the spring of your junior year in high school, when you learn everything you have to do. And, you know, in order to get into the Naval Academy. So not only academics, but sports and community activities and church and a job. And they want a whole person concept. So I dove right into that. At some point in there, you know, like, what do you want to go to the Naval Academy for? And it's in the back of my head, it's in my soul somewhere, I'm going to fly. And it honed into when I was at the academy, when I graduated in 81, of course, the Tomcats had shot down Libyan fitters and all that kind of stuff. It honed down to, you know, I'm going to go fly Tomcats, but I'm going to go fly jets off the boat. I'm going to the Naval Academy so I can fly. And Mom found one of those kindergarten, you know, lined papers where you'd practice your cursive. And I had written a story with a picture of an airplane on it, right about 1969 or so, when I was, you know, something around 10 years old. And it says, I want to fly in Vietnam and drop bombs. And it was a pencil thing. I still have it. It's over
Right.
somewhere. And so there was the notion to fly is somewhere in my DNA. And so I went to the Naval Academy. I went there to fly. I got into the Naval Academy with a lot of help, obviously, from mentors and doing the right thing. And I got there, and all I wanted to do, I took aerospace engineering as a major. Why? Because, well, that's what you do when you're going to go fly. And all I wanted to do was get through the Naval Academy. I worked my butt off in the academics. I worked my butt off. I lived test to test. I graduated with a 2.7. But the idea of getting through there was high enough class rank to be able to draw a naval aviation slot. And I got on service selection night in 1980, 81, I guess spring of 81 is when they do it. So February of 81, graduation, and you know, a few months later, I drew a pilot slot and selected a class down in Pensacola. And so that's how I got there. And then, and I'll lead into flight training for a second. I know we're going to talk about this. I'm going to flight school. I'm going to fly Tomcats. I go to flight school. I get my private pilot's license in between at Miramar. We got TAD to Miramar, a bunch of us buddies. All that's detailed in the book. I got my private pilot's license because somebody told me, hey, you'll get a leg up if you do that. So I got my private pilot's license and actually did my check ride the day before I drove east to Pensacola.
Wow.
Got that done. And now I head off to Pensacola. We got through the academics, which were easy relative to the Naval Academy, but a lot of guys do drop the pack down there. And so I focused because I'm going to fly Tomcats. Everything I did in flight school, I dove into hard. I partied hard, but I dove into really hard because I've got to fly Tomcats. That means you got to go jets. You got to get a class rank. You can select what you want. And hopefully, you know, hope against hope, there's a Tomcat slot available at the end of your training, you know, all the way to when you get your wings, right? So I go down there. I get my initial equipment outlay. Haven't even touched an airplane yet. Haven't been in a primary airplane. Got into the T-34 yet. And we were told to tape our helmets with the reflected tape. I put the silhouette of a Tomcat on the back side, right side of my helmet. And if I was an instructor down there and this kid showed up with a Tomcat on the side, I would have had him for lunch. And you know what? Nobody ever did. And I went through flight training. I got jets. I went down there. I'm focused on this. I got married to Kelly. I'm focused on jets. I finished everything. I did the best I could. I learned. I found that flying jets and actually flying airplanes, you know, suited me. And I got to the end of flight training, and guess what? They had a Tomcat Miramar slot, and that's the one I selected. And then I got to go there. First time I flew that Tomcat, Gary, it was like I was home.
Let me back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the football game.
Yeah.
So clearly there was something there that was an itch for you. You saw something, you identified with it. You said, I want to be that. Well, being that, you didn't really quite know at that point. It wasn't because you wanted to go Navy Air. It was because you thought that was going to be right for you. The academy was going to be right. At what point did you recognize that the larger purpose was aviation?
Well, what's funny is I don't know what about the midshipman in the long black coats and the white hat caused that emotional response, but it was an emotional reaction. I'm going there. And then that actually honed into I'm going to fly. And so I just was, there wasn't like this big flash, of like, oh my gosh, here's the larger issue. I'm going to go fly. No, I'm just going to go fly. That X-ring for me was right into a Tomcat cockpit. And I'm going to go to the Naval Academy, and I'm going to succeed at the Naval Academy, and lacking a couple of different calls to my parents during plebe summer was like, what am I doing here? I don't want to be here. And then it was just them talking to me, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. But the whole rest of the time was, I'm going to flight school.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing. I'm going to flight school. And it just stayed as my focus, Gary. It wasn't like a larger thing. And it always, that's what I do. And I got to Pensacola, and I loved flying. And a lot of people in the first classes, academic classes, would talk about who wants to be a fighter pilot? And everybody raise their hands. First time somebody goes like that, yeah, like 2 out of 3 go, nah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll stay upright. I loved it. Aerobatics, formation flying, precision. You and I talked about the precision of flying an airplane and making it do just exactly what you're going to do. I just loved it. And so it just was what I do and what I wanted to do. And it fit. And at no time in the progress or the system here did it ever dawn on me that there was some kind of a second thing or a second choice, or maybe I don't want to do this, or nothing about it. Flying an airplane in the first place, getting into jets, doing all the maneuvers in jets, doing all the phases in there, getting on the boat, even though it's just pretty much terrifying. This is me. I got in that Tomcat the first time, pulled back on the stick, because there's no stick in the back seat. So you do a bunch of simulators and you pull back and this is home for me. This airplane is my airplane. It just stayed like that.
But it wasn't the first plane you flew. You came through Pensacola. You started in what, T-34? What was your primary trainer in Pensacola?
Yeah, T-34 Charlie. So a turbo mentor.
Yep. Okay. So you come out of there. Have you flown turbines yet coming out of Pensacola, or did that hold off till you got to Miramar?
Yeah. So we go to T-34. Two things. First, I went into we called it the teeny weeny T-34, because the VT6, the training squadron I had actually still T-28s with the big old radial R2800s in them. And that was old school and cool. But I actually was saying to myself, I want to fly turbine airplanes, so I want to get familiar with turbine instruments. And so when obviously that's a turboprop. So when you start up, it's just like having a jet engine in there, just that it drove the prop. The second really cool thing that I thought was really, 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 really neat is you're in this fore-aft cockpit, and I was looking through the prop, and the first couple of times I did that, it was like I'm in a World War II airplane. It just was really cool looking at that. But I got jet grades, which is doing well enough, thinking ahead of the airplane, like you and I talked about, to go down to NAS Kingsville, Texas, and fly the T2 Buckeye first for basic jets, and then the TA-4J Skyhawk. So total of about 300 hours in 270 hours in jets before getting.
Got it. Now the Skyhawk was subsonic, correct?
Correct.
So,
but it could kill you. So I was just talking to a class the other day. I went down to NAS Oceana and told a couple stories to the landing signal officers down there. And I opined, as I often do, it's too bad that they do current naval aviation training in the T-45 basic and advanced, because the Buckeye, the T2 was so forgiving, big fat airplane. I mean, you can do Lumshavaks in it. Doesn't matter. You let it go, it's going to fly. Very forgiving, big. It's a great way to learn how to fly a jet. And then you move into an A4, which can kill you. And you have to really kind of watch what you're doing. And it required a sort of an amplification of your skills to get in and perform the A4. And so I liked that, T-34 to T2 to TA-4J to the Tomcat. In fact, I will tell you, the first time I pulled back on the stick in the Tomcat, I thought I was looking over an A4 nose, because it's just a nose. And then you turn around and there's a whole tennis court behind you of metal that you can see and go, I'm not in an A4 right now.
That's amazing. So you get to Miramar, replacement squadron. I mean, how did they place you? What was your slot?
Yeah, so there was a student, VF 124, learned how to fly a Tomcat, did all the phases of the Tomcat, and then, day and night carrier qualification. I finished, so I got my wings in April of 1983 out of Kingsville, started flying in the Tomcat replacement squadron in November of 83, graduated in June of 84, and got assigned to VF-51 Screaming Eagles that were going right on deployment. So I did well enough in carrier qualification to be what's called a Pri-A, and then went right on deployment with them. Before your listeners think Mike Manazir's all of that, I failed CQ in the TA-4J the first time.
Really?
I did not do well in that. And as in a couple of places that are detailed in the book, terrifying catastrophe, like I'm done, I won't get to fly my dream of Tomcats because I failed in carrier qualification and they didn't actually know if they'd allow me to come back yet. And so that failure, actually, when you get to go back, I've always, since I was a landing signal officer for a long time, a total of 8 years in increasing seniority, I've always thought that you should carrier qualify twice, because the first time you do it is 6 traps or 6 landings in the T2, and then you're done, and you're so sensory overloaded, you don't even know what you did. But since I failed in the A4, again, six traps and 6 approaches, I was able to experience that and then come back later on and fix what I had done wrong the first time. And it was that failure that gave me the learning to be able to come back and succeed, which is a major theme in my life and my teaching.
What was the gap? 2 questions. What was the gap of time between you not failing? And second, how did you rationalize, deal with, and reflect upon what caused you to fail? Because I'm going to guess you didn't blame the airplane at this point.
No. So it's interesting. When I first went to Pensacola in November of 1981, I failed the first eye test. My right eye, he said, was 20/25. And that was the first one. It was like, no, I have to fly. No. Hey, Doc, I got to fly. You don't understand. The next test I had was the blood pressure, which was off the charts, because now I'm thinking I can't even make it through. And we call that the NAMI whammy. It's the Naval Aeromedical Institute, is NAMI down there. And many an aviator has gone down with an idea to go be a pilot, and they get shoehorned off to something else, either a backseater, right seater, or absolutely something else, because there's something medical they find that the Naval Academy didn't find. And so I failed my first eye test, and Gary, I went back. The doc said, come on back later this afternoon. Don't read anything, like focus on things at a long distance or whatever. And whether he put his thumb on the scale because I was so insistent, like I was kissing his shoes, please, God put his thumb on the scale, or just something happened, I passed that eye test. That was first failure. I passed. Went into everything all the way to A4CQ, great grades. And so A4CQ was in, so that's November of 81, that failure. A4CQ was in January to March of 83, because it's the last thing you do before you get your wings. And so more than 2 years, no, I'm sorry, a year and a half. So a year and a half between failures. And then when I got to requal, and there's another hidden story here, when I got to requal in the A4 with the carrier, that was about 2 months between failure and success.
Okay. So for our listeners, so CQ is carrier qualifications, which you're not going to get your wings until you get that done. Of course, if you went for P3s or helicopters, you'd have your wings by then, which I understand. But walk me through not qualifying the first time. This was your dream. You were scope locked on it from the minute you realized you wanted to go to the academy, or shortly thereafter. Then you get knocked on your butt. What went through your brain, and how did you pick yourself up off the deck and know you were going to nail it next time or go back the second time? Walk me through that.
Yeah, I knocked hard. I mean, knocked out, head on the pavement, squished, stomped on, horrible, life has stopped. My focus to get into Tomcats was so hard that failing to gain that goal was emotionally unacceptable. And I couldn't believe it. In fact, the deeper part of the story, Gary, is I'm on the bow. I've completed my last trap in the A4 on the carrier right off of Key West, Florida. And the paddles comes up on the radio and says, hey, 144 paddles, go ahead. You're a qual. They tell me I'm a qual. And like, woo! And I went off, I aileron rolled all the way to Key West over the water. I was whipping around. I was king of the jungle because I had qual. They had told me about halfway through, hey, you keep getting fast in close, which is quarter mile crossing the ramp, like you're pushing the nose over. So work on that. Okay. Advisory call, that's it. And usually if somebody's having problems or is not going to call, you sideline them, you take them out of the airplane, you talk to them, don't do this. None of that happened to me. And I went off the carrier with you're a qual in my head. Huh. I get to the runway, I land, come into the brake fast, a little bit low, fast, good brake, aero braking all the way down the runway, just being a frickin' cowboy. Taxied in, got out, down the ladder, and the officer in charge walks out and says, literally, hey, Manazir, you're a disc qual. And I went, no, they told me I'm a qual. He goes, no, they called back in and said you're a disc qual. Wow. I'm like, kind of dropped like this. And I said, well, for what? And he says, for being fast on all your approaches. What? And so, I mean, shock, sheer emotional, like shock. And I'm kind of walking in a daze, shocked, being told I'm done. And I just can't believe it. And hey, come on, we'll call the ship. So I call the ship. They give me a debrief on the radio. I barely even answer. And they say, you're fast all the time. You didn't fix it. And so, we didn't qual you. And when I learned how to be those guys, it was such poor treatment of me as a student. It was horrendous. Yeah. Horrendous with what they did to me. And so, but my little student body is like, oh God, so there I am. And, I called Kelly and I cried on the phone and she cried because that's all I wanted to do. And I didn't know whether they're going to let me continue. And then I go back to Kingsville and they review my performance there and they go, hey, we'll let you go try a second time. And I go, oh, I get to try again? Oh my gosh. And then that focus came right back. And then in the interim, I got to do air combat maneuvering training with a legend in the fighter community, a guy named John Roach, call sign Bug. And I got to know him. And it's just because I was so out of sync with the other people in my class, I needed a wingman for my simulated air combat maneuvering training. And it was Bug. And it later on, as I became a landing signal officer, he was a legendary landing signal officer. I patterned a lot of what I did off of him. Had I not disqualled, I would not have flown with him. I would not have met him. That would not have driven how I became an LSO. And so I actually think God said, you're going to disqual. You're going to meet Bug. You're going to have a good time with Bug. You're going to qual, learn a lot, and you're going to get out and go fly Tomcats. And
okay, so we do the, now you're at Miramar. You got your Tomcat slot.
Yeah.
So that's been the dream all along.
Yep.
But then you start moving up and you keep going and eventually into a non-flying slot, which you knew had to be ahead of you. I mean, when you were captain or a strike group commander, you could always go, but you knew that was on the horizon the longer you stayed in. Mm-hmm. At what point did your own horizon start to shift toward leadership?
Yeah, I think leadership, lowercase L, I started learning at the Naval Academy. I learned how to follow at the Naval Academy, and then I learned how to lead there. And what I learned is the secret to leadership is you lead with your heart and not your title. You lead by being a good human. You lead by connecting with other people. So I learned little L leadership all the way through whenever I was given the opportunity to either lead peers or lead a division in maintenance or be a department head in a squadron or something like that. When I got to Miramar and I went to VF-51, everything's competing. You're always competing. You're competing against your peers. You're competing for the fitness report from your boss to get you to the next level. And I just had this drive to do the cool things in Tomcats. I was a pilot and I was also a landing signal officer. And I went all the way through landing signal officer to be a CAG LSO, the head landing signal officer on the Enterprise and on the Abraham Lincoln. I got selected. I tried my very best to be the best junior fighter pilot I could be in VF-51, and the skipper selected me and a couple other, backseater and a wingman to go to Top Gun. And everybody wants to go to Top Gun, and you just have to do the best you can. And so the same theme that I went through the Naval Academy, where I just want to get, do the best I can so I can fly. I want to do the best I can in the ready room so I can be given the opportunity, to go to Top Gun and stuff. And in fact, when it came time for my orders out of VF-51 in May of 1987, I did well enough in Top Gun to be offered a Top Gun instructor slot. And so I had a rose and a carnation handed to me. You can either go to the replacement training squadron and train kids how to fly F-14s, or you can go to Top Gun to be an instructor. And I went to my skipper at the time, who was a Top Gun instructor, very famous in the airplane. His name is Jim Robb, rookie, and God rest his soul, he passed away this past year. But I said, hey, skipper, I've got this choice. And he says, Nasty, if I were selecting a department head in my squadron, which is going to be your next job, right after leaving the training squadron, after you go be a CAG LSO, I would take a guy who spent his time teaching youngsters how to fly a Tomcat than I would a Top Gun instructor who taught really good aviators how to be better. And I went, you're right. And I don't want to stop being an LSO. And so I went to the replacement training squadron. I was there for 3 years training kids how to fly the F-14.
Fascinating. So there was always that part of you that, you look at it and you think about a fighter pilot, which is a highly singular existence. You really have to have kind of a lone wolf mentality. But at the same time, there was a part of you that wanted to share the wisdom that was accumulating along the way with others. So it's funny, it goes back when you talk about your mom and dad, it's almost as if both of those both of those influences are now existing in you. Your dad's side on the fighter pilot side and your mom's side is being that warm, welcoming, you can do it kind of a thing. And you're carrying both of those through.
Yeah.
Without conflict, it seems.
Gary, you could be a psychologist. Here's why. Here's why. And I'll bet you there are more than a few of your listeners right now who are dealing with imposter syndrome. I have imposter syndrome, or at least I had it all the way through being the CEO of Nimitz. Didn't even realize it. Didn't even realize it. And again, I have that combination of ego. I'm a fighter pilot. Of course I'm a fighter pilot, but also, hey, I don't belong here really. I have sort of a combination of introvert, extrovert, even though, the energy I have, I draw energy from people. So I'm an extrovert, but certain crowds, I don't come out as much in, but the imposter syndrome gives me a sense of humility where I want to explain to people what it took to get me here and the failures that I experienced. So they wouldn't ever look at me and go, well, he's all of that. Of course he, did that. And he's got an ego this big. And, it kind of goes with the emotional makeup. And so I always felt driven to explain to junior leaders kind of what I did to get to the position I was in. And in fact, when I was Strike Group Commander of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Strike Group in 2012 and 2013, I would convene meetings of the executive officers of the squadrons who were just assuming their first command position. And I had that in 1998 with VF-31 as a skipper. And what I realized after I had VF-31, XO of Carl Vinson, CO of the US Sacramento, CO of Nimitz, and then I was Strike Group Commander, how much I didn't know in my first command job. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I thought I was, like I'm a commanding officer. Of course, I know everything about leadership. And so I would convene meetings of these guys who were on a path kind of like mine. And I would answer questions and explain how I got to where I got. And I would give some hints and making sure if you're about to fall off the, the side of the road or something, somebody's there to grab you and go, no, come back this way. Because all of us and all of your listeners, anybody who's successful, if you're really successful, you're bumping off the guardrails all the time. And some of it's personal, some of it's professional. You're always pushing limits. Some it's personal, some it's professional. And so sometimes, so I would give hints about that stuff. But that imposter syndrome kind of feeling is motivating for me because I share information with people to help them kind of come up the ladder. And I encourage that to people. And the way in which I connect with people, and in an organization chart, they'll be junior to me, but to me, we all work together. I will connect with them with my heart and being a good person, because when you are the captain of a carrier, the gradient between you and 4,999 people is straight up. When you're the CEO of a company, especially a very large company, the impact you have when you stop for a second, shake somebody's hand, or stop by their puka and say, hey, thanks for coming to work today. I don't know if you know me, but my name's Mike. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course I know. You don't have to bother with me. And the higher the gradient is, the more power that human connection comes from. That's what drives me to tell people about what it takes to be a good leader, because oftentimes we'll see status or we'll see levels or whatever, but nobody says how. That's why the book is very clunky. Learn how to lead to win. One is because the Amazon algorithms, but the other one is too, yeah, that's actually what it is. So, hey, Mike, how did you do this? I have found when I talk to groups, and I'll stop talking in a second here, Gary, because you got me on, you know me already, and we've only talked for a few minutes. I have pitched leadership inside of Boeing, where I was for 8 years, because I got invited, like all vice presidents, to speak to big groups about leadership. Paid gigs to talk. Very diverse audiences, from 10 or 20 in a closed seminar all the way to 800 in a conference room. And if there was time for a Q&A, every single question that ever came up, anytime in any diverse audience, not only did I have an answer, I actually had a story from my Navy career. It happened to me. And so leadership is plagiarism. You just kind of watch how things work, whether it's you or somebody else. But I always had a story, and it was like shocking, which is actually why I wrote the book, which is 33 stories about going through the Navy. So
Well, I'm definitely going to read the book.
Syndrome that drives that.
So I would push back just a little bit on the imposter syndrome, because to me, that syndrome, which I understand, fuels the hunger to get better and learn what it is you don't know. And the older you get, the more you realize, the less you know. But again, it wakes you up every morning saying, I wonder what I'm going to learn today. I wonder how I can make my life a little bit better. Your focus from the outset, where you couldn't articulate exactly what you needed to do to go from first realizing it was naval air and then Tomcats, and your aspirations continued up, is fueled by that. It's fueled by solving that next problem, even the fact you didn't know how. When I talk to financial advisors, or I talk to anyone that's trying to think about what I call the power of irrational thinking, the only one that is available, or the only one that can figure out if you can do it or not, is you. And it's very interesting, because what you call the imposter syndrome actually has a background in neuroscience. We take in extraordinary amounts of information every day. Our brain processes 11 million bits of information literally every second. It's everywhere. We can only actively focus on 40 of them. And the phenomenon, it's not even a phenomenon, it's part of your brain chemistry, is called the reticular activation syndrome, RAS. As a fighter pilot, and as a civilian pilot, I can tell you flat out that from the minute I would get to an airport to the minute I would leave that airport, there was nothing else in my world but that airplane. That was it. It was my sacred pact with the airplane. Not in the dangerous world that you flew in, but any airplane can kill you. But it was just nothing else is going to get in. Nothing. And it allowed me to continue to grow, where I got comfortable flying in zero visibility. I got comfortable on longer distances. I started to make better judgments, survived a few crazy things. But it was that focus that allowed me to come through that imposter syndrome, because when my examiner handed me my ticket at the first time, he was very, very clear. He says, this is not a license to fly. He goes, this is a license to learn. Never forget that. And I was like, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy had like 37,000 hours flying back and forth to the Far East. But the point, Mike, and I so enjoy your comments, is this whole concept of leadership is really an internal aspirational drive, where you never take yourself, that you've arrived at some destination. There's
Mhm.
always something you can get better. And the last thing I'll say is the best way to improve yourself is to have responsibility to teach others what you've already learned, because it keeps you totally in touch with where you've been. You've got to stay really sharp on all of it,
Yeah.
because if not, no one's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
So I know we just have a few minutes left. How do people find you if they're interested in hiring you for speaking? Tell me about your book. Tell me how people find you.
Yeah. Thanks. Before I do that, I just want to validate everything you just said. And for instance, specifically, 36 years in the Navy, retired as a two-star, went to Boeing for 8 years. Just before this last, well, I joined a startup called Hadrian Automation this last January. So 8 years in Boeing. Now I'm in a startup. It's just the journey I'm on. And I tell people from a leadership perspective, leading people, you only need to do two things. One is value them for who they are, what they're bringing to work, why they came to work, and perspective, and make them believe they're part of something bigger than themselves. It's that leading people is the same everywhere. Connect with your heart, do those things. And so I have found that I continue to find that purpose is what drives me. And it's that learning you're talking about and bringing people along with you, because I will tell you, in writing this book, I really dove deep into what it means to lead. I've had to answer questions for myself and for other people on what it means to lead. And so your comments, they are perfect. And I just wanted to underline, bold, italicize, put them in big font, what you just said. Thanks for asking. www.mikemanazir.com has a whole bunch of content. There's a little pop-up thing that says hire Mike, and I come talk about this kind of stuff. I have a great little 1 hour brief that I start with a pretty good story about jumping out of airplanes with the Golden Knights. I give 3 threads of leadership. I tell another story about it's very heartfelt and emotional for me as part of something bigger than myself at the end. Then I answer questions. I do a weekly newsletter. You can sign up for that newsletter, and it's coming out. We're doing a different series. I did 100 on the top 100 leadership topics that ended just a little while ago. We started doing specific newsletters that go to each chapter in this book. The books can be gained on the website. I have this one, Learn How to Lead to Win, published on Amazon. It's there to get that. You can get a signed copy on the website. There's another book called The Manazir Maxims, because in the back of the original book, in the back of this book, there are 10 rules that I think are the most important for leaders to focus on when leading people. And we built out a book that actually took those 10 rules and made a chapter out of each one. And then there's a study guide that you can do with that. So there's a whole bunch of content on there. There's all the old newsletters are in the blog section, and you can kind of look through there. And they're all things should be familiar to people. But I've so enjoyed being on with you today, Gary. You get me. I mean, the naval aviation thing, and then
yeah, it's a pleasure.
Perfect. Yeah.
Last question. When you see an F-18 fly over, how's that make you feel?
Yeah. So, of course, we always look up. You got to see it. And it's always this great little pitter patter in your heart. But what I thought you were going to ask me, and down here on my left shoulder is a model of a Tomcat and a model of a Super Hornet. And people always ask me, which do you like better, a Tomcat or an F-18 Super Hornet? And I tell them the same thing. I have a 2-car garage. On the left side, it's a 1967 Corvette, mid-year Corvette, loud, sexy, fast, doesn't turn very well. That's the Tomcat. On the right side, brand new 2025 911 Porsche, digital, turns on a dime. Computers work the thing more than you do. That's the Super Hornet. Love them both, but my heart is with the F-14 because that's where I started.
I completely understand. Mike, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully we'll get to do this again, because there's so many more things I'd love to talk to you about. But I really do appreciate your time. We'll make sure we get all of the your website and everything else about the book and all the other things you're up to. We'll make sure we get those up when we publish our podcast. Folks, you've been listening to Mike Manazir, retired 2-star Admiral and all-around cool guy. This is Gary Cinderbrand, the public only knew. We'll see you again on the next podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.